That's an interesting one because we always associate sound with waves. We associate vision with waves, but taste and smell. I wonder what if you were to break that down as far as what that is.
I would trust Edwin's opinion on that. Continuing the March 18th edition of the Electric View, we explore the role of flora and fauna and how they would express their genome inside another electric environment.
They're ions, right? Heather was talking about it, the smell of things.
Well, clearly,
yeah.
The receptors there, I think, I'm sure others know that well, but the receptors are basically like chemical receptors, meaning the only specific compounds can connect to those receptors. When they connect, that triggers, and there you go, Neil, a small electric impulse, a nerve impulse, that's translated into a flavor, taste, feeling, expression, etc., right? A sensation.
Memory triggers and so forth.
Does it have a time component to it?
Well, all nerves must.
Some of them.
I would think it's like directly into your nervous system, right? Then, like aromatherapy or tasting something, like a smell can take you back somewhere. A smell can put you more in the reality of a memory than anything else. And when we actually,
I agree.
When we we're smelling, right?
There's another thing that I learned. It does travel. Smells travel in the same equation as the inverse square law. Ironically, by their dampening, if they're potent or pungent, and then they diminish at the equal scale of the inverse square, which is just crazy. It's weird how that keeps coming up everywhere.
If you think about the sphere expanding, that area is proportional to that. So
yes, same thing.
The density of the area. So.
Yep, and the cloud. So that would be the atomic or the electric probability cloud of electrons as well, most likely.
Good point.
Well, I'm happy that we got on to something like this. It reminds me, I was actually thinking that we were going to talk about something about Heather's, some of her work, was talking about stuff like this, which is where we're at the point where we're trying to understand, because there obviously has to be waves, and obviously a myriad of waves progressing through transverse and otherwise through the mediums that we're talking about here, and it is these studies of these regular recurring patterns that where astrology got born, and it had a point to it, obviously for divination purposes alone. Like, yeah, you should probably not do that because last time we did that, we all died. So let's do this instead. Whatever the argument is, there's always,
I like the one where it's like the Peruvian the shamans where they're asked how did they know which plant to go to, and it's like to just talk to us, and that seems to me to be like where the answer is for a lot of this stuff.
Well,
is that like a cosmic serpent?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I would infer in a way with after Julian James's work to think of it like how would you interpret things that you thought were real and were able to talk to you if you were able to, and of course when a planet comes near, we were talking about what would happen if the ground induced like singing and rhythms and undulations and so forth sound wise, like because of piezoelectric effects and so forth. That would be just
deafening.
Well, it depends on how loud it was.
Right.
It could be something almost like musical. And I've been heard that there was stuff like that the gods taught us music, that the gods spoke this, and that kind of thing.
Well, that's where you get the muses from, like, I can't remember the muse of music, but Terpsichore was the muse of dance. So that a lot of that, the martial arts came from a lot of the plasmoid features.
Yoga too, I think, in the way old Buddhist stuff, like
the initial stances and katas and stuff started from those patterns. I know they say they put like animals in pits and watch them fight, but where did they get the idea to even do that in the first place?
Well, okay, it comes down to listening and not expecting it to be of a certain nature, right? It might come to you in all those forms, but if you're looking for those forms, you're more than likely going to miss the actual message coming to you, the actual conversation.
You're looking for, right.
Name it before it happens. You're looking for something, and then you're not allowed. If you sit still, it will find you. I listen to plants, and it's not a hum, and it's not a talk. It's just like words come, and why did that say? Like, where did that come from? And that's how I know that it's external, that it come. And it's funny because when you get to know them, you'll notice their expression. One of them have a certain kind of attitude of a different kind, and it isn't necessarily specific to a kind, like all geraniums talk to me this way. It's not that way at all. They have their own individual personalities. People think I'm crazy, but like, there'll be times when terms come to me when I'm deep in the dirt. And I'm talking, I'll ask, I have a conversation. How are you today? I'm whatever, I address them that way. And, things will come to me, actual words, and I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, I know that did not come from me. And then I have to take time to listen to that and find out what it was trying to say to me. And oftentimes it's very deep and very surprising. But if I was to say, talk to me and then sit there and wait for it to hum, that's not going to happen.
Is there a language? Is there a name for the language of the plants? Maybe someone could look that up, see if there's a name for the language of plants. I mean, I'm thinking like mycolinguistic. It's like mycology. There's. Well,
I would think phyto.
There's probably a billion different things. I know there's the microbiome. And that's like in your gut.
Right. And I would think that it's myco.
Well, to bring this...
The Language of Trees by Heather Stargazer.
Well, trees are specific, right?
Oh, okay, now we're being judgmental about plants. Sorry. I'm not being all-inclusive with regards to plants. My bad.
One thing is well noticed, animals tend to speak the same language, right? When a dog is whining, or a horse ninnying you, or a cat meow, like their inflection, their tone, their language, their body language, they're speaking a similar language to the other animals. You know what I mean? When you hear a seal talk to you, it's not what my dog. Sometimes I'm like, you sound just like a baby seal. You know what I mean? Right. And it's like, this is the same language. So are the plants speaking the same language?
I think the crowd shyness thing.
Yes.
Is it crowd shyness, or is it crowd respect? Is it respect for the language?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I don't
know. Which one is it?
I think that you can take this right directly to sensation and propagation, which is arguably why things exist, because they want to feel, they have these feelings, they follow them, these feeling receptors that are inherent, that they have no idea are there, why they're doing what they're doing. The majority of creatures, when they're having sex, look at the look on their face. They're like, what is going on? They're like, whoa. And like they're temporarily possessed. There's a season for mating. I mean, a lot of creatures, there's a season for mating. Wow. And if you think about it like that.
I question the porn you've been watching. That's all I'm saying.
I'm picking up on your direction, though.
Yeah, continuing where this is going, it is there is the tree. You asked if the tree itself is inviting birds to perch on it. because it desires the claws of the birds, because it itches the bark, and they want to be picked at by the woodpecker because it gets those worms out. And you look at everything as a symbiotic relationship, and you start to understand, wow, when you look at nature, it teaches you everything and more that there is to learn. Keep watching nature, and you'll notice that the houses of the raccoons, they fill the void of these fallen branches, because the branch needed to fall anyway, because it needed to prune itself. So a big, huge ice storm happened to come to an area of trees that really needed pruning, and a bunch of the branches fell, providing a bunch of new homes for a bunch of new creatures. But they draw certain funguses are only underneath certain trees, and they draw the necessary environment, not only for the sustainability of itself, but for the sustainability of its partners around it. And this goes back to the logarithm on the scaling of forests in the Amazon. There's a gentleman who, if you show him the size and the size of a tree, and you give him a certain square footage or acreage, he can tell you exactly how many other trees will be on that grid based off of the size of one tree, because they follow these logarithmic scaling laws. Even the trees and the freedom of them allowing for holes to get in for the light to preserve the spaces and the crown shyness. They have to be willing to take self-sacrifices and help out their neighbors. And that's why it's so sustainable. There's nothing dirty in nature. It cleans up itself 100%. There's no such thing as dirt. Dirt is made up. It's filled with nutrients, because everything is.
Right.
And you look at
the cycle too. You know,
the cycle of
that life-death cycle.
Everything is worm poop. Yes.
From the mulch comes all the new life, you know. So then that's all the, you know.
So electric biology by Buddy James,
quote unquote dead material, but it's just part of the cycle. You know.
And then it's fungus, and then, you know, all of a sudden it's this really potent, like, just all of this energy packed into this tiny little thing that's eating on life, that is a carnivore. That's a plant,
and it's the blossom. That's the scarab ultimately from Egypt. It's like it comes from, you know, it lays its eggs in the, you know, it's the shit, right? But it's like that. It comes from that, and that's kind of that was one of the things that they obviously deified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you'd have to look up on that. Actually,
I'm sorry.
The scarab beetle. There's well, needs to say there's obviously a lot of legends and stuff about it and whatever, but it had a holy, something holy about it, and something about the color as well, the green.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What if they were just huffing dung in bags, and those bags that everybody was carrying around was dung, and it was from the dung beetle because they were getting high off of it?
Okay, well,
seriously, I have references to that, you know, whoever it is and whether they're reliable or not. But this has been stated as and it's part of alchemy too, where it's that final stage ultimately where they get it's out of that's the transmutation actually.
There's certain things that see in my mind where I immediately go is to understand what this all necessarily means. Because we also have to think about the fact that the Earth didn't always have the sky. And, for example, green things, if the rumors are true that Saturn was close to us and it was from the north and it had a green light that shined down, and the scarab beetle itself is also green, everything would be green tinted in the world, at least at night especially. This would leave a situation where green things would be very bright. they would be brighter than most. So things like that, like translucent green beetles and green glass, desert glass and stuff, would be very beautiful. So they would, because it would shine very beautifully in this light. And since it's the same reason why we couldn't see blue for until a certain time, until we invented the word for it, which would imply that the sky was sort of reddish or purplish.
Theoretically, that's a theory.
No, of course it's a theory. I mean, but I'm trying to understand how it would be trying to understand things and why something like that would be attributed special properties. Doesn't mean I'm right, of course. Just an observation that's not usually considered. But you don't like, then of course people would infer after that, like, well, it glows like this and it's important to the god, and obviously therefore we are all shit and we come from shit and we can make ourselves better by eating insects.
Did I just see the word photodendric? Was that someone posting photodendric?
It's the word I made up. It's phytodecare. It's plant speak. Phytodecare.
Who made it up?
Oh. I did.
Oh, all right. Yeah, we got it. We do have to create part.
Because I looked it up and there was no word for that. I've been searching and there's lots of...
That's a beautiful thing, Heather, that because you're, like you said, plants don't move. They are inherently stuck to their cycles and the cycles of the planet. It's not like they can, not that we aren't, but even ancient. More so. So usually because they are drawn directly from the earth and they are part of the same water table as all the other plants, so if there was to be communication, it doesn't necessarily have to be on top of the ground. Could easily be something through the earth that they all recognize, and then they could be translated to us and shamans who listen to the forest way back when. I can see a possibility, but you're saying, you're the one that deals with these plants.
Yes.
These people, and these, and they are communicating with you. One thing, they don't get any other communication because they're only connected to themselves and to the water supply there. You don't actually have them planted in the earth, I don't think, connected to everything else.
What do you mean?
I'd assume, anyway. So if that's the case, then you have a wonderful bond with them, more so than most, I would think.
Well, but I mean, that doesn't... Okay, any I don't understand what you mean, like not like if they're like planted in pots or whatever, they're still in dirt, you know what I mean? Like if you're talking about like potted tomatoes or porch pots or plants inside your house or any of those. I had this discussion about grounding plants, and people were talking about like hooking copper coils up to them and sticking one end of it in their electric socket, and I was like, is that safe? And they're like, yeah, we do it all the time. And I'm like, I don't think I'm down for that. Like, my plants do just fine in my house without me electrocuting them, right? Or grounding them in that way. Because I don't necessarily think that that is necessary. And also, copper is used for like purposeful root pruning. Like you can paint the interior of a pot with a specific type of copper product, that copper based product, that when the roots go to it, they sense it's there and they invert and they turn themselves around, or they no longer try to go that far out, so they effectively root prune themselves. And that's really interesting, because that's like they're seeing that copper and they're like, no, we don't want this, so they're gonna come back again.
Well, and I think that has to do with the electron thing that we were talking about earlier with regards to copper. It's like, it will drain us. Like, it's not a good thing,
Right. Well, and I do see though that when like things have the ability to dig into like crazy things like that, they will and they will flourish more. So, but what is the grounding? What is that grounding really? Because if you live in a high rise in Manhattan and you want to put a tomato plant in your window, you can still ground through that tomato plant, 50 floors up in a window. So is it the soil? Is it the microbial ecology? Is it the communication? Like, is it the plant itself that's grounding you? Is it, that electrical discharge exchange, whatever that's happening between them? But they are interacting, I would guess, no matter where they're planted, as long as they're in dirt. And also to that effect, that is talking about regular earthbound, landlubbers. Then you have hydrophytes, which actually grow in the water. And so you have hydrophytes that are planted, like rooted in the water. And then you also have things like algae and different types of littler plants that float on the top of the surface of the water. And they are just floating along the current. I mean, obviously, where it's more stagnant is where those types of things will start to grow, but you can see the swirls on top of them where the liquid underneath is moving, and they are confined to a pool, but they're transient within that pool.
Oh, they get to I think I understand what your statement is. In no way was I trying to disturb the possibility of a morphic resonance between plant species or anything like that, but also I was simply to say that plants that are planted directly into the ground, like a big tree, I meant, like that's what my mind was thinking, and then it goes and it touches the main water table to get its water. The entire forest, it would all be linked in that because of that connection. Yes. And of course it's connected to the rest of the planet via telluric currents and so forth. Yes. And that's all I meant, because you are directly dealing with pruning potted plants, like right there in front of you, beautiful plants, and you're going to understand that these they are something that are necessarily, they're not separated, they're in different water, is what I meant. And I just thought that because of that, you might have a better bond with them, because it's like, well, I don't have many people to talk to. There's only like one or two plants hanging out with me, type of thing.
Right. No, I don't think so, because I think that you can be open. I think that maybe I have been gardening since I was a very small child. It's been very influential in my life and bonding experience for, my matriarchs in my family and a few of my patriarchs. It's something that's brought us all closer together and that I was raised with. But I don't think that, so maybe I am more open to those specific currents, but I don't think that necessarily has anything as much to do with it as it might seem, because I think that anybody can be open to it, no matter how little experience you actually have with plants or even with animals. I mean, you could never have had a pet in your entire life, and there's this one animal, cat, dog, whatever it is, that touches you. All of a sudden you're communicating. You're like, whoa, I don't usually like cats, but this one's special. He's been hanging out with me, and all of a sudden, now you're understanding what everybody's been talking about this whole time, and now you can talk to other animals too. The same thing can happen with plants. But I would say more too that it's not. I don't think that they're shying away from one another. Just as I don't think they're shying away from us when they're up in the cloud or up in the crown. They're giving each other respect. They're creating channels for that sunlight to get to the plants that are at their roots, that are facilitating the microbial ecology, that's facilitating the roots, that's facilitating the whole growth of the tree. So by giving each other enough room and respect, they're allowing everything to flourish. They're not shying away from one another oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to touch you. Oh, I'm just going to stay over here in my own little bubble because I don't want to touch anybody else.
They intentionally kill other plants though too. They're not. It's not all about respect. It's definitely a selfish thing, because they're trying to propagate their self, and they're trying to give themselves and their progeny the best type of environment. And if that means killing
species, only if it's an invasive species, and generally invasive species are displaced species, things that have come from a welcoming home environment where they worked within the ecology, within the system itself, and they've been taken and put somewhere else where now they have to struggle, and in their attempt to struggle, they become dominating because they aren't normally there, and the plants that are there don't have the strength to compete with the plant that's taking over. Now, this plant came in from other places. It's stronger. It has roots. roots that go down inches. Our roots only go down 3 inches. We have enough respect for each other that we all know that roots don't go down more than 3 inches. Now this guy comes in here. He's from a place where roots go down 4 inches. The only way he can survive here is to put his roots down 4 inches. And now there's no room for our roots anymore.
I would like to agree there very much, Heather. I too have my whole life been not a professional gardener or anything, but I've had a garden my whole life. I've been studying nature my whole life. I still do a little bit of gardening in an old-fashioned way for a little bit of veggies and stuff and potatoes and whatnot, right? And I have berries, bushes, and fruit trees and nut trees, etc., etc. But many species are more or less not natural here, or more or less, adopted in the natural system. But I wholeheartedly agree that all the natural species here are much more in working together mode, if you will, right? Profiting from each other's being there, right? Right. One species is symbiotic. That's the word I was looking for. Very symbiotic relationship. And the invasive species, they're still, the ecosystem does respond to that, what you said. In their struggle, they become dominant if they can, right? And due to their success, they dominate. But the ecosystem will find an answer, between brackets, that is, a response is going to come, and then it starts to level out. And in the long run, it will be symbiotic, and in balance. I agree.
Well, I don't know if it will, in the end, become balanced. What it tends to become is stands. So there'll be an area that's just this, right?
Well,
so
sure.
they're necessarily included in the entire. Some of them are. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are things you would be amazed are not natural for your area. Everyone, doesn't matter what area you're in. Like in Arizona, there's only really one tree that grows leaves, but there's tons of trees. So
one thing that's super. Sorry, go ahead.
What are you gonna say?
Okay, one thing that's super strange. I was listening to one of the suspicious observers not Ben, but another gentleman on the crew, be interviewed by another very wise gentleman. I think it was called Ralph. His name is Ralph, but I sent the link to David. But what they were talking about is that these explosions of life and always happen after ice ages, which precluding ice ages is a polar reversal. So during these polar reversals and then a huge ice age, the majority of the species all die off, including the humanoid species. And there's been several different humanoid species that have gone through different ice ages, but ultimately that set of species dies and becomes something else. All these creatures they don't just go completely extinct. It's more like in the fossil records we're finding that they become new. Well, the same amount of species that go extinct, there's the same also amount of species that come into being, new species, never been on the earth before. And it's almost like the existing species replace new species are replaced, replacing the existing species. And what I see time and time by looking at nature is these creatures is it's just like electricity is inside of these different bodies, and it's basically electricity having an elephant experience, electricity having a human experience, electricity. I mean, but then you could get into consciousness or plasma.
That's the idea of it manifesting in matter. It's the manifestation in matter is one aspect of the entire picture where it also exists. That pattern exists at very, very high frequencies as well, right. That's outside of the material world.
Yeah.
That's an idea, at least. So.
Like galactic consciousness, and like these are fields that are mimicking higher dimensional fields that are mimicking higher dimensional fields. And these fields are the same field, but they just change frequency.
Scale.
They just change scale or frequency.
Once you scale it, the frequency goes down in heterodyne. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what's going to happen again. And how does this happen? Every time the same the same conditions are set up every single time. Cold, condensing the existing species to deal with it, cope, to deal with it, cope, and then become something else.
And that's almost biologicals from and also cosmic rays, electrical functions that can accelerate those biologicals into advancing or mutating. So and then also have all the water for them to give them life. So that's why.
Yeah, the whole opening up of the holes in the atmosphere, allowing all these cosmic rays to come in. Some things, if you hit directly with it, you die. I hear some of them or whatever, but other ones will just change the DNA, and it's just a growth into a next period that is in sync with after the double layering effect of an ice age. If you think about an ice age as a double layering, then as we go into that double layer where it's hot and mixing up with cold, creating the current, and we get out of that, it's just weird to think about that as a whole concept
at a super low frequency.
Well, two things. Number one, I think that me and Ed would probably have a different opinion after watching or reading John Cook's work on SaturnianCosmology.org and stuff like that, where he's talking about the different types of ice ages. So, be that as it may, I understand about extinction events, though, because there was, apparently every 25 million years, according to conventional geology or evolution
ice
or whatever. Core? No, this is way before ice cores. But every 25 million years or so, there was an extinction event and then a rapid speciation. So with that, I also can understand. However, what you're describing when you're talking about the mutation of the next species, you're talking about cosmic rays, which is hard radiation. It won't be any different than, it will kill a lot of things. If their idea, if almost his idea is that kind of thing, that's very scary. However, I really don't know if that's true. The reason like I said, I have reason to think that there's much. We're going to see an increase, and there's going to be problems because of it. Does it mean that we're going to suddenly lose the Earth or something like that? Hopefully not. Hopefully he's a doomsayer. But this is such a new territory. It'd be like me arguing if me, Ben, that guy, and Don Scott and a bunch of other people sat down in a big room and decided that we were going to try to figure it out to come to a best conclusion, the only thing that we would help do is make ourselves feel better, because no one really knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Robert Lala is really interesting on that, by the way.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
So let's just say, hopefully not. That's all I can really say.
But there were cultures that did go underground. Whenever they thought, or it gets predicted that these things they were told that these things were going to happen. So, they could have been absorbing a safer amount of radiation, surviving it, but yet still mutated in their genetic code, which have been carried over in their
I see a possibility.
Eating habits, yeah.
I know what happened to the twin astronaut, right? Because he was in the space station, and he was it was kind of a safer environment, but he was still being exposed to all kinds of space radiation.
Yeah, actually,
that guy looked just like Bono to me.
But your difference is the idea that it's going to actually mutate things on Earth, would be horrifying if it's true.
Well, I didn't mean instantaneously. I said they would be carried over in the cellular level, like the sperm and the ovum, and then whenever you conceive, they would be mutated then.
Well,
and then it would be that.
You'd be carrying on the next generation, and they wouldn't even breed true with their parent. Like I said, you'd have a hybrid,
Yeah, but there are a few problems with this hard radiation thing. It does cause
what's just a thought?
Stuff. Yeah. Well, think about it. The reproductive cells are pretty well protected.
True.
Well, so what I'm saying is, if you get a dose that's high enough to cause effect on those cells, especially the female egg cells, then the specimen would die already, right?
It would be inviable, yeah.
So there's some problems there. But the electric environment change, I could see that has a link to expression of DNA, etc., and resonance. That I can very much see.